The Sacrificial Lamb, a Reverend Margot Quade cozy mystery novella, Book 2. Written by S.E. Biglow. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. 1. Winter was slow to leave the tiny town of Port Marie. Freezing temperatures and record snowfalls lingered into mid-March. Sitting in her office, Margot Quade looked outside. She could see the cold beginning to thaw, and the tiniest shoots of new growth breaking the surface of the ground. The new life emerging reminded her that everything had its time. Only a few short months ago, she'd been called to serve her hometown's interfaith congregation as a minister. Finding her place again filled the void left by the end of her military service. Coming home hadn't been as easy as she'd hoped. Warren Nesbitt's murder became another black mark in the town's tragic history. Even if the gossip hadn't ignited, as it sometimes did, Derek and Catalina Nesbitt had uprooted their lives to get away from the reminder. There had been no trial. Both of Warren's killers had taken plea deals and were serving reduced sentences in a minimum security facility upstate. Margot looked up from making notes for next Sunday's sermon to see an email from Derek. He'd promised to stay in touch despite everything, and he'd stayed true to his word. Just as she was about to open the message, a sharp knock on her office door made her wait. Pedro Sanchez, the new custodian she'd hired, poked his head into the office. He was fresh out of college and eager to do a good day's work. "Sorry to interrupt," he apologized. Margot waved him into the room. "I think I need the distraction. What can I do for you?" "Well, I was down in the basement to make sure everything was okay. You know, the electrical panels and boiler and everything. I think there's been some water damage from all the snow." Margot wasn't surprised. The building itself was relatively old and could use a bit of a renovation. In fact, the combined congregations had agreed to help fund such a project once winter ended. "Let's go take a look." She let him lead the way through the sanctuary and down 2 flights of stairs to the basement. She doubted anyone but the custodian had paid a visit until now. "I noticed a weird smell earlier, too," Pedro said when they arrived at their destination. Margot inhaled, trying to catch a hint of whatever had drawn his attention, but she couldn't pick anything out. Pedro entered first, flicking the light on and casting the small room with a yellow glow. The basement was a cramped room with a pair of support beams in the middle. The electrical panel and boiler were housed along the far left wall. Stacks of extra metal chairs leaned against the right wall. A handful of boxes sat against the wall directly in front of her. Margot saw dark stains on the floor where it met the far wall. Maybe Pedro was right, and there had been damage from the storms, given the high snowdrifts and poor drainage around the building's foundation. "You smelled that?" he asked. Margot inhaled again, closing her eyes this time to let her body focus on her sense of smell. She could pick out some general must and dampness common in basements after winter. She exhaled through her mouth and took another breath. There, something putrid. Faint at first, the stench started to build as she walked deeper into the room. "I do. I think it's coming from that wall." She pointed directly ahead. "That's what I thought." "I don't think this is just water damage from the snowstorms," she said as they shoved the boxes out of the way. The plaster wall had been painted beige. Even in the dim light, Margot spotted uneven color in a couple places. She turned to Pedro. "Can you get some flashlights? The paint here looks a little off, but it could just be the poor lighting." "Sure thing." Pedro disappeared back upstairs, leaving Margot alone in the space. She stepped up to the wall and ran her fingers over the paint. Despite the fact some parts looked more faded than other sections, it all felt coarse from the plaster. She tapped her knuckles on part of the wall that appeared newer. She moved her hand along the wall from left to right, her hand striking what sounded like a hollow space. "That's odd." "Pedro, you might want to grab a hammer while you're at it," she yelled up to him. She didn't get a response, but assumed he heard her suggestion. She took another step along the wall. The paint looked older, as if it bore the original coat. "Light and a hammer," Pedro announced from behind her a moment later. He set a heavy sledgehammer down against one of the boxes and flipped on a camping lantern. It cast a stronger orange glow along the wall and confirmed Margot's suspicion that there were different coats of paint. "You're right. It looks like someone painted over parts of the wall," Pedro agreed. "This spot here is hollow," she said, pointing to the swatch of newer paint. She wasn't an expert, but she figured even the newer coats were still old. Moving to the older section of paint, she knocked on the wall again, finding the same hollow sound. "It's hollow here, too." "You think somebody just did a bad job insulating the walls?" Pedro asked. "I don't know, but I have a feeling there's something back there. The smell has to be coming from it." "What do you think it is?" His eyes sparkled in the light. She wasn't as eager as her young friend to find out the answer to that question. A host of things could be hidden in a church built in the late 1800s. Anything with that kind of smell wouldn't be classified as a good thing. "I don't know. Be careful with that hammer, though. We don't want to take the whole wall out. It's load-bearing." He hefted the hammer over his shoulder. "Don't worry, I got this." Margot appreciated his confidence, but took a few steps back to give him a wide berth. She should have asked if he'd used a sledgehammer before. He squared up to the newer patch of wall and took a batter's stance, gripping the hammer with both hands. He took a practice swing, giving the wall a gentle tap where he intended to hit. On the next swing, he put more force behind it, and the wall cracked, kicking up dust. He coughed, but took another swing. This time, the chunk of wall he'd been aiming for crumbled to his feet. "What do you see?" she asked as the dust and grime settled. Pedro picked up the lantern and held it aloft. To his credit, he didn't drop the lantern as he scrambled back from the hole. "Dios mío! Is that—" Margot inched forward and peered into the hole to find a set of small human remains. The sight of it turned her stomach, but it also spurred her to action. She looked at Pedro. "Don't touch anything else. We need to call the police." 2. Margot dragged Pedro away by the arm back upstairs to the main floor of the church. His eyes had glazed over, and he was silent. Shock did strange things to the human body. She ushered him into one of the last pews in the sanctuary. "Stay here. I'm going to call them." "Who was it?" he finally mumbled. "You're going to be okay," she said, not answering his question. He shook his head and buried his face in his hands. Margot gave him a pat on the shoulder before retreating to her office. She knew she should dial 911, but instead she hit the speed dial number 3 on her contacts and waited as it rang. "Is this a social call?" Sam commented after the third ring. Officer Samantha Raymond was an up-and-coming officer on the Port Marie police force, and she was also Margot's younger cousin. They'd worked together to solve Warren Nesbitt's murder. She was the only person Margot trusted to solve the mystery sitting in the church basement. And unlike most of the other officers on the force, she was less likely to tell Margot to keep her nose out of things. "Unfortunately, no. You need to get to the church now. We found something, and you need to see it." "Okay, I'll be there." Margot said a silent prayer of thanks that her cousin didn't ask too many questions. Sure, they'd butted heads the last time they'd worked together. Then again, Margot was the one who saw them as a partnership more than Sam, but Sam was a good investigator. Satisfied that law enforcement was en route, Margot returned to the sanctuary and sat beside Pedro. She took one of his hands in hers and gave it a firm squeeze. "You're going to be okay," she repeated. "It was so small," he said. his voice croaking with emotion. She tried not to think about what she'd witnessed, even though it was already burned into her memory. Having a clear head would serve them both better when Sam arrived. They fell into silence, and Margot closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing. A sense of calm overtook her just as a hand tapped her shoulder. Margot jolted and opened her eyes. Sam stood before her. "That was fast," Margot said, releasing Pedro's hand. "You made it sound urgent." Margot nodded and stood, heading toward the stairs to the basement. Sam fell into step beside her. Jerking her chin toward Pedro, she asked, "What's up with him?" "You'll see," Margot answered, and started down the creaking steps. For a split second, Margot expected what they'd found to have been a trick of light or their imagination. That when they stepped into the room, the wall wouldn't be hiding anything at all. "It's in here," Margot announced. She let Sam go ahead of her into the room. Sam covered her mouth instantly. "What is that smell?" Without the wall acting as a barrier, the scent of decay filled the room. "It's coming from inside the wall." Sam shuffled forward and used the lantern light to peer into the hole. She stepped back, just like Pedro had done. "That's a body." "I think there might be another one," Margot said, taking shallow breaths. Sam glanced at her over her shoulder. "Where?" Margot gestured to the patch of older paint. "This area sounded hollow when I tapped on it." Margot expected Sam to pick up the sledgehammer and take a swing at the wall. Instead, she reached for the radio clipped to her belt. "This is Officer Raymond, requesting a forensics team to the Interfaith Church. We've got at least one dead body." "Copy," the dispatcher answered, their tone muffled by the crackle of the radio. "Want to tell me how you found this?" Sam prompted. Margot gestured toward the stairs. "Can we talk up there?" Sam nodded, and they retreated up the flight of stairs. The air was less pungent, and they both relaxed. Margot settled on the landing. "I was in the office working on Sunday's sermon when Pedro let me know about some water damage in the basement. He'd gone down to check the electrical panel and the boiler, given all the storms, and there was an odd smell. We went down to check it out. There was definitely a smell, and I noticed the paint looked different. I mean, the same color, but you could tell it had been painted over many different times." "So you decided to just start punching holes in it?" Sam asked with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "I thought it made sense to see if we could find the source of the smell so we'd know who to call to solve the problem. And it worked. You are the right person to solve this particular problem," Margot answered with a shrug and a sheepish grin. "Why is it every time we see each other these days, it's over a dead body?" Sam smiled. Margot laughed. "Just luck, I suppose." Heavy footfalls announced the forensic team's arrival. 2 jumpsuit-clad men with cases approached. Margot didn't recognize them, but the town had more than 2 forensic technicians. "There's a body down in the basement. Well, a skeleton. Reverend Quade thinks there may be a second body, too," Sam explained. "I can show you," Margot offered, before Sam could stop her. She led them down the stairs and pointed out the spot that had sounded hollow. "We'll take it from here," one of the technicians said, and set about examining the first set of remains. Sam grabbed Margot by the arm and led her back upstairs to the sanctuary. Pedro still sat in the pew with his head bowed. "He's the one who unearthed the remains," Margot said in a hushed tone. "I'll get someone to come take his statement when he's ready. I'll need you to do the same," Sam responded. "I'm happy to do it now to get it over with." "We'll need to go over to the precinct to type it up. I'd rather wait until the guys downstairs do their thing and we know what we're dealing with." They settled a few pews away from Pedro. Margot couldn't remember anyone talking about maintenance work in the basement since she'd been at the church. "What's on your mind?" Sam prodded. "I was trying to remember if there was ever talk of the basement being redone or having work done on it in the entire time I've been here. I can't think of any." "Just because they didn't talk about it doesn't mean it wasn't done. We were kids." How much did we pay attention during those annual meetings when they talked about the budget? Sam had a point. Margot and Sam had spent most of those meetings in the back of the sanctuary playing tic-tac-toe on that Sunday's order of service pamphlets. Maybe she could go back through old work orders for clues. Or she could go to the one person who would know. You know, there's someone who could tell us if there was anything going on that wasn't talked about in the wider congregation, Margot said. I'm listening. Conrad Baptiste, the previous custodian. Conrad had resigned a few years back, when Reverend Hawley retired. According to her predecessor, Conrad's resignation letter cited back pain and advanced age as the primary reasons he could no longer care for the church. At least, that's what Reverend Hawley told her when it came time to fill the position. I'm not sure he'd be willing to talk to us, Sam answered. Why not? I always thought he was a nice guy. You missed a lot while you were away. After he left, he stopped coming to church, or going out at all. He embraced the label of shut-in. So, he's eccentric. People like their privacy, which is fine, but it didn't go unnoticed that he stepped out of the public eye. If you think he'll talk, I can send a patrol car by his place. If Conrad had withdrawn from society, Margot suspected Reverend Hawley put him on the weekly meals list from the church. She couldn't imagine Reverend Hawley not making certain Conrad was taken care of, given his length of service to the church community. Before she could make the suggestion to check the list, the two technicians trudged up from the basement. You were right, Rev. There was a second body, one of them said. I didn't want to be right. Something Pedro mentioned came back to her. The first set of remains looked small, she said. Childlike, she thought, but she didn't want to say it out loud. Given the size, both appeared to be the remains of children, the tech confirmed. From the anatomy, we can gather they were male. Given the growth markers, I think they were prepubescent or early teenagers. We'll know more once we can get them back to the lab and run more comprehensive tests. I'd better call this into the precinct, Sam said, and stood up. I need to check something before I join you to give my statement, Margot said. Okay, Sam said, but don't take too long. She would also need to notify members that the church couldn't be used for any services until the police released the crime scene in the basement. I'll put something up on the website and let the other worship leaders know we've discovered some structural issues after the storms, Margot said. Until we can get them resolved, services are suspended. Good idea. Sam followed the techs out of the sanctuary, leaving Margot and Pedro alone. I know this is overwhelming, but you're going to need to give a statement to the police about what you found. I'll go with you, Margot whispered. Okay. Pedro didn't look ready to move under his own power, so Margot looped an arm around his shoulders to help guide him to his feet. We just need to make a quick stop in my office, she told him. She would give her statement to Sam, but she needed to check those meal recipient logs first. 3. The meal delivery records weren't hard to find, and as Margot had suspected, Conrad had been a recipient for a few years. The next scheduled delivery wasn't until tomorrow, but Margot was sure bringing the meal to him a day early wouldn't be a problem. Besides, she could twist Reverend Hawley's arm to accompany her. He wouldn't mind paying a visit to an old friend. In short order, additional officers arrived at the church and cordoned off the basement stairs with crime scene tape. Margot hated that the church was unusable until the police concluded their investigation, but she understood the necessity. Armed with the information she needed to pay Conrad a visit, Margot accompanied Pedro to the precinct. Officer Weiss manned the dispatch desk, just as he had months ago during the Nesbitt investigation. He looked up and gave them a knowing nod. Officer Raymond is waiting for you both in the bullpen. He gestured to a doorway to their left. Sam sat at one of the desks in the center of the room. She looked up from the computer screen in front of her and waved them over. Margot ushered Pedro forward. The shock of what he'd witnessed was wearing off, but he looked exhausted. The sooner he could give his statement and get some rest, the better. Margot made a mental note to call his older sister Belinda, so he wouldn't be alone later. "You should take Pedro's statement first. He needs to get home and get some rest," Margot said, plunking the custodian down in the seat next to Sam's desk. "Sure. Why don't you go over to Officer Katz and she'll take your statement?" Sam answered, addressing Pedro directly. Pedro looked to Margot, wordlessly seeking her guidance. She gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. "I'll be over here if you need me." He accepted her vote of confidence and marched 3 desks over, sitting down beside Officer Katz. Margot took his place beside Sam's desk. "So, what do I have to do?" Margot knew from her last encounter with the law what giving a statement entailed, but Sam drummed on the edge of the desk with her fingers, and Margot picked up on her nerves. In the back of her mind, Margot hoped explaining police procedure to a civilian would give her cousin a chance to do something familiar. "I already put together what you told me," Sam said with a small smile. "You'll just need to read it over, make any necessary changes, then sign and date it, like you did last time." "Right. You look nervous." Sam raked her fingers through her auburn locks. "Not nervous, exactly. The lab guys have some high-tech equipment that dated the remains. The one in the new section of the wall is about a decade old, and the older set was 20. Margot stared at Sam, dumbfounded. How could 2 children's remains have been left unnoticed for so long? Someone out there knew who these children were and how they got there. That's unbelievable. Sam leaned in closer, casting her gaze about to make sure no one paid them too much attention. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but it looked like there were some score marks on the bones, probably from a knife. It isn't confirmed yet, but I'm guessing someone stabbed them." Margot wished Sam hadn't filled her in on those details. As gruesome as they were, they only piqued her curiosity. For the second time, Sam had divulged sensitive case information to a civilian. Margot's brow furrowed. "No, you shouldn't have told me that. That's part of an active police investigation." Sam worried her lower lip. "I know. Look, you were helpful with the Warren Nesbitt case, and this one is basically in your house. I know you well enough to realize you aren't going to let this go. You'll dig into it whether I want you to or not. Just anything you find, run by me before you do anything. Promise me." "Isn't that against the law? Won't anything I find be inadmissible?" "You let me worry about the legalities. Just promise me that with anything you come across, you fill me in." Margot mulled over her response. Sam was right in one respect. Margot had no intention of letting this drop. She couldn't simply walk away, especially after she was involved in the discovery of the remains. Too many unanswered questions remained. Who were the children? Had they been reported missing? Did she know either of them? She would have been old enough to remember the disappearance of a child 20 years ago. The death of a local child a decade ago would be fresher. Nothing came to mind in that moment, though. "Okay," she finally said. "I promise to call you if I find anything, but I can't imagine what I'd find. Be straight with me, Margot. Where are you planning to go next?" Margot's cheeks burned a little with embarrassment. Her cousin was better at her job than she gave her credit for. "I was going to see Reverend Hawley to ask him if he remembers anything about work being done on the basement during his time at the church. If he does, I'll pass it on to you." "Okay, good. Margot, until we have more information, you can't mention what you found in the basement." "You have my word." Sam glanced over at Pedro. "We'll make sure someone gets Pedro home after he finishes his statement, and make sure he understands he needs to keep quiet, too. Call his sister. He shouldn't be alone right now." Sam gave her a sad smile. "Will do." Margot waited while Sam printed out the statement she'd put together. Margot read the contents carefully, impressed with her cousin's recall of their conversation. She signed her name at the bottom and dated it. Now it was time to pay her mentor a visit. "I hope you can figure out who those children are," Margot said, and gave Sam a sympathetic look. "Thanks." Pedro was still deep in conversation with Officer Katz as Margot pulled her cell phone out of her jacket pocket and dialed Reverend Holly's number. Reverend Holly answered on the second ring. "Margot, this is unexpected. How are you?" "I'm okay. I was hoping you had time for a little visit." "For my favorite pupil, you know I do. Why don't you come by the house? I'll put some coffee on." "I'll be right over." Margot ended the call and headed for her car, formulating a version of the truth she could share with him that wouldn't get her in trouble. Come in, come in." Reverend Holly ushered her inside before she could even ring the doorbell. "Retirement suits you," she commented as she took off her shoes at the front door and hung her coat on a peg in the foyer. "I'm enjoying a little quiet reflection these days. Remind me, do you take milk and sugar in your coffee?" "You've got a good memory," she said with a smirk. That boded well. She followed him into the living room and settled onto the couch. Even though it was warmer outside than it had been in weeks, a cozy fire burned in the hearth. Reverend Holly returned to the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Margot accepted hers with both hands and inhaled the rich aroma. He sat in an overstuffed armchair across from her. She took a few sips of her drink to prepare herself for the conversation. "Something is weighing on you, Margot. I can see it on your face. What's wrong?" She set her cup down on a coaster. "You were always good at reading people. I did actually have something I needed to ask you." "I'm all ears." She needed to be careful how much she revealed. He'd likely seen the notice she'd put up about services being canceled for the foreseeable future. "We found some structural issues in the basement today at the church. I didn't find any invoices about work being done. Do you remember if there had been any problems before?" Reverend Holly rubbed his chin, his gaze trained on the dancing flames in the hearth. "I can check the records I have here, but I don't remember any work being done down there. What sort of issues did they find?" There were mismatched paint layers on one of the walls." It was the truth. He didn't need to know about the entombed bodies. "To be honest, I didn't go down there much. You know who you should speak with? Conrad Baptiste." Margot hid a knowing smile behind the rim of her coffee mug. "Does he still live on the edge of town?" "As far as I know, though I haven't heard from him in a few months. He retired because of his back. I visited him for a while after that and convinced him to get on the meal delivery program." "I'll have to see if I can get a hold of him then." "Do you have any idea how long it will take to get the issues cleared up? I can help you make other arrangements for services, if you'd like." "Oh, that's very kind of you, thank you. I appreciate the help. And no, we aren't sure yet how long we'll be out of commission. We still need to have someone come out and tell us what we're really dealing with." She hated lying to her mentor. "Whatever I can do to help, please let me know. I may not be leading services there anymore, but I still consider that church my home." "And we are always glad to see you and accept your generosity." She paused to collect her thoughts. "If you wouldn't mind, would you come with me to talk to Conrad? He doesn't really know me, and I'm sure he'd be happy to see a familiar face." "Of course. We can go now, if you'd like." "Oh, you know what? Why don't we go over tomorrow morning? He's scheduled to have a meal delivered. We can take it over together." "Sounds perfect. I'll meet you there." "I'll see you tomorrow morning, then." Margot downed the rest of her coffee. "Thanks again for chatting with me." "Any time." Margot showed herself out. Conrad Baptiste held the answers, after all. Every sign pointed to him. Please let him remember something. She would let Sam know they were going over to talk to him in the morning, assuming officers hadn't already made contact with him today. She had the keys in the ignition when her phone rang, displaying Sam's cell phone number. "I was just about to call you," she answered. "Can you come back to the precinct?" Sam's voice was hushed and strained. "What's wrong? Can you tell me why?" A sense of dread gnawed at her stomach. "I'll explain when you get here." The abruptness of the call and the evasiveness Sam exhibited set Margot on edge. Whatever Sam needed to share couldn't be good. 4. Sam waited outside the precinct when Margot pulled into the parking lot. She climbed into the passenger seat before Margot could turn off the engine. Margot turned sideways to face her. "You're worrying me, Sam. What's going on? You have an in with Conrad Baptiste, right?" "I wouldn't call Reverend Hawley an in. He's more like an old friend. He suggested Conrad as the best person to talk to if you're looking for a lead." Sam pinched the bridge of her nose. "I ran his name through the system just to verify his address, and something came up. He had a son named Thomas who ran away about 20 years ago." Margot frowned. "I don't see how that's relevant." "You know what I'm getting at," Sam argued. "Spell it out for me." Her palms grew slick with sweat as her mind filled in pieces like a Mad Lib that she didn't want to believe to be true. Sam turned in the seat so she faced Margot. "I don't think he went missing." "That's a leap, Sam. Don't jump to conclusions just because it would make your job easier." "I'm not jumping to conclusions. I'm telling you it seems suspicious that he's at the heart of this thing." Margot shook her head. "I'll admit that it is tragic that his child went missing around the time the first boy died. That is heartbreaking. But right now, it's just a tragic coincidence." Even as the words left her mouth, Margot doubted their validity. "I need to talk to him. Are you still planning to see him?" Sam asked. "We're not going until tomorrow. Reverend Hawley and I are bringing him his weekly meal. I'll meet you over there then." Margot wanted to argue with her and insist that she didn't need a police chaperone. She also knew it was futile to object. "Of course." After a moment of silence, Margot asked, "Do you know when you'll be able to release the crime scene in the basement? I understand you need to do your job, but it would be good to set expectations with the congregation. Reverend Hawley agreed to set up alternate arrangements, but that will only work for so long. We'll release it when we're satisfied that we've collected everything we can get out of it." That was not the answer Margot had hoped for. "Okay, try to keep me in the loop on that so I know what's happening with the church." "Will do. I'll see you tomorrow," Sam answered, and climbed out of the car. Margot sat in the parking lot for a solid 5 minutes, contemplating her next move. She settled on going home to collect her thoughts in a place where she felt comfortable. The trip from the precinct to her one-bedroom apartment a half-mile from the church took no time at all. She entered the small space and took stock of her sparse furnishings. If being overseas had taught her anything, it was that possessions didn't matter in the end. They only weighed a person down. Margot furnished the place with mementos from her time abroad, as well as the family and friends she had reconnected with upon her return, but nothing over the top. Some habits were hard to break, including the need for order. She was up at 7 o'clock every day, and her bed was made, even if she didn't leave the house. At present, she needed to quiet the thoughts racing in her head. Sam's disclosure about Conrad's son stuck with her. She'd dismissed Sam's suspicions, but what if Sam was right? The investigation would eventually identify the remains, but Margot's curiosity overwhelmed her. She couldn't wait that long. While she couldn't remember anything specific about the missing boy from her childhood, the local news likely had something. Small towns were notorious for reporting the big scandals in their community, and Port Marie was no different. With her laptop in hand, Margot curled up beneath a handmade blanket from her mother and found the town's newspaper archives on the public library website. For a small town, Port Marie was surprisingly modern. All of the news articles had been digitized about a decade ago. She typed Conrad Baptiste into the search bar and waited for the results to load. Only one article popped up. Local church custodian's son vanishes. by Veronica Morris, staff writer. Tragedy has befallen Port Marie as 14-year-old Thomas Baptiste, son of Conrad Baptiste and Maureen Prescott, vanished without a trace. According to court records, Mr. Baptiste and Miss Prescott separated some time ago, and Thomas alternated time with his parents. Miss Prescott resides in a nearby town just over the Vermont border. Speculation abounds whether his parents' strained relationship led the young man to run away from home. On the evening of March 17th, Miss Prescott reported to police that her son never returned to her home as had been arranged after a visit with his father. Mr. Baptiste informed authorities he had placed his son on the bus back to his mother's residence and never saw his son again. At this time, the police do not believe either parent to be involved in Thomas's disappearance. Anyone with any information about the young man's whereabouts are urged to contact the chief of police. The article listed the phone number for the precinct. It hadn't changed in 20 years, and little else. No follow-up story existed on whether Thomas was ever located. The article dislodged a memory from her sophomore year of high school. "I remember now," she murmured to the empty apartment. Thomas's disappearance had been the talk of the town for a couple of weeks until the case went cold. The candlelight vigil held at Town Hall was the first time Margot had really prayed for something. She prayed for his safe return, but God hadn't heard her prayer back then. He'd also failed to answer when her best friend Penelope and her sister Olivia had gone missing a year later. Maybe now she would get some answers to one of the two mysteries that had marred her teenage years. She studied the article again. It had a small black and white photo of Thomas off to the side. It was grainy from being scanned and uploaded, but she could picture him from school, passing him in the hallways. They hadn't shared any classes together, but he'd been well liked from what she remembered. Sam had been in his class. Maybe she remembered more, too. What happened to you? If Sam's hunch was right and Thomas's remains had been located in the basement, at least Conrad might have an answer. Margot only hoped he would be willing to help the investigation. 5. Morning dawned, and Margot rose before the sun. She'd been unable to get the image of Thomas's missing persons photo, or the remains, out of her thoughts. Despite all she'd witnessed overseas, the loss of children cut deep, especially when they'd been entombed in a place that was meant to bring peace and comfort. She poured her coffee into a travel mug, prepared to down it on the trip over to Conrad Baptiste's house, when a knock at the door caught her off guard. Even though the meal was dinner, deliveries were made in the mornings by volunteers. He'd be expecting it, so they wouldn't catch him off guard. Setting the mug aside, she answered it to find Sam waiting on the other side of the threshold. Her cousin sported dark circles under her eyes, and she shifted her weight from foot to foot. "What are you doing here?" Lack of sleep clouded her own thoughts. "Did you forget I'm coming with you on your meal delivery to Conrad Baptiste?" Margot blinked, their prior conversation coming back to her. "Right. I assumed you'd meant to meet me there. Guess I'm a little eager to speak with Conrad." "I did some light reading last night," Margot admitted, before grabbing her mug and following Sam downstairs to a waiting patrol car. "Please tell me it wasn't anything you shouldn't have access to." "Not unless archived news articles are suddenly off limits. There was just one article about Thomas's disappearance from the paper, but no follow-up articles. After they reported he went missing, nothing else was ever discovered." Margot set her coffee in the center console. "I remember him now. He was in your year at school." Sam started the engine. "I know. It came back to me when I pulled the file and recognized his picture." "Was there any good news in the file?" Maybe he'd been found, and it just hadn't made the news. "No. The case went cold. The officers back then talked to both parents. There was confirmation of a bus ticket purchased, but witnesses' statements conflicted on whether anyone saw Thomas actually get on the bus. Ultimately, they couldn't ever find anything conclusive. So, we're going to be dredging up bad memories for this man who hasn't had closure in 20 years. Margot frowned. Relax. I'm not going to push him too hard if that's what you're worried about. I just want to know what he knows about the basement. They arrived at Conrad's split-level home 10 minutes later. The outside had seen better days. Water stained the siding, and loose shingles dangled on the roof. With his bad back and the heartbreak of losing a child, it wasn't unreasonable to let outward appearances go. Reverend Hawley's truck was parked down by the mailbox. He climbed out, a container in one hand, as he waved to Sam and Margot. "I didn't realize this required a police escort," he commented with a soft chuckle. Margot wasn't sure how to respond. She'd been careful to keep the true nature of the situation at the church quiet, like Sam asked. "We were having breakfast, and I was heading this way, so I offered to give Margot a lift." Sam lied far more effortlessly than Margot was comfortable with. "Oh, that was thoughtful of you," he said with an amiable grin. "If you're here, you might as well stay. I'm sure Conrad will be happy for the extra company." The three of them marched up the cracked front steps, and Reverend Hawley rang the bell. Margot could hear the tone of the doorbell echoing inside the house. She resisted the urge to peek into the bay window. It didn't stop Sam from taking a peek, though. "Maybe he's not awake yet," she said. It was a reasonable assumption for a man of his age. Besides, the car that had been parked in front of the garage didn't look like it had run in quite a while. "He's always been an early riser. I thought I got up early, but he always beat me to the church in the mornings," Reverend Hawley said, and opened the screen door, thumping his fist on the wood a couple of times. That seemed to rouse the occupant, because the door opened about a minute later, and Conrad Baptiste stared at the three of them, crowded upon his front step. "Reverend Hawley," he said, "what are you doing here?" Pale blue eyes peered at them from sunken sockets. His gray hair covered his scalp in thin wisps, and his skin was extremely pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun in years. He held up the container of food. "It's been a while since I paid you a visit, and I knew it was delivery day. I wanted to see how you're doing." Conrad nodded, regarding Margot and Sam with more suspicion. "And you, ladies?" Margot extended her hand. "Margot Quade, sir. I've taken over Reverend Hawley's position as minister at the church. And this is Officer Samantha Raymond." Conrad shook her hand. She noted his veins and the weakness of his grasp. He was frail. He said, "Thanks for the food, but now's not really a good time for a visit. I haven't been feeling well." "We won't stay long. We were just hoping you might remember some things about church renovations," Margot said. Conrad's brow furrowed as he focused on Margot's face. "I suppose you can come in for a minute?" She smiled. "Thank you so much." Margot, Sam, and Reverend Hawley moved into the front hall and followed Conrad into a sparse living room. It was furnished with a couple of wicker chairs and a sofa that had seen better days. Margot looked around and was surprised by what she saw. The mantel was lined with photos of his son at varying ages, leading up to when he went missing. If she had to choose a word for it, she would have called it a shrine. "I don't remember any renovations," Conrad said, reclaiming Margot's attention. "You know, I think you're right," Reverend Hawley said, taking a seat on the couch. Margot sat beside him. Sam leaned on the arm of the sofa and tracked Conrad's every movement. Now that they were inside, Conrad seemed nervous and fidgety. Margot cleared her throat. "It might not have been anything official," Margot said. "We just noticed some different paint patches in the basement. Do you remember if there was ever any reason that sections would need to be painted over? Maybe water damage or anything like that?" Conrad stroked his chin, and his eyes went unfocused. At least he was trying to remember. "Not that I recall, but I worked at the church for a long time. I can't remember everything I did there." "We understand that," Reverend Holly said, starting to stand. "Don't worry too much. I'm sure everything will be fine." "While we're here, I was hoping to ask you a couple of questions about your son, Thomas," Sam interjected. Reverend Holly whipped his head around to look at Sam with a surprised expression. Margot was beginning to regret not filling her mentor in on the situation. Objectively, she understood she couldn't share the details of an ongoing police matter with him, but it would have been better if he hadn't betrayed his surprise at the sudden change in questions. Conrad mirrored Sam's suspicious expression. "Why do you want to know about Thomas?" "I'm relatively new to the department, but I was looking through some cold cases," Sam said. "When Margot mentioned you had been the custodian at the church, it made me remember that your son was one of those cases I had looked at. I was in the same grade as him. I think we had a few classes together. Anyway, I'm interested in seeing if I could find out anything new about the case." Margot knew most of her cousin's statement wasn't true, and she had to admit she was impressed with how easily Sam fed the older man the lie. Telling falsehoods was a sin, according to the Bible, and yet Margot had to constantly remind herself how lying had become a part of human society and their culture. Her chest tightened for a moment as she reminded herself that she was engaging in the behavior too. "I don't know what else I could tell you besides what I told the police back then. I put Thomas on that bus back to his mom, and he never made it there," Conrad answered in a flat, emotionless tone. "I know this is hard to talk about, but did you get the sense that Thomas wanted to run away before then?" Sam pressed. "He wasn't happy his mother and I split up. But honestly, what kid is happy about a divorce?" His voice took on a tinge of bitterness at the mention of his ex-wife. "Right. I'm sure it was hard on everyone," Sam said in a compassionate voice. "It's a big change. But he never mentioned wanting to run away? Did you reach out to any of his friends in the area?" "No, he never said he wanted to run away." Conrad looked over his shoulder, as if checking to make sure they weren't being overheard. The fidgeting that Margot had noticed when they first sat down returned. "I have things to do. I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "It was good to see you, Conrad," Reverend Holly said, and passed him the meal container. Margot offered her hand, and he shook it swiftly before disappearing into the kitchen. She followed after him. "Would you mind if I used your bathroom before we leave?" "It's back down the hall on the right." "Thank you. And again, we really appreciate your time this morning." He nodded. "Sorry I couldn't be more helpful." She retraced her steps and saw that Sam and Reverend Holly were waiting at the front door. "I'll be there in just a minute. I need to use the bathroom." She followed the front hall around to the left and spotted a door that was partially open. Curiosity really was her biggest flaw, and the one thing she found she couldn't turn off or ignore. It wouldn't hurt to just take a quick look. She nudged the door open more with her foot and peered in. It appeared to be Thomas's room, given the decorations. 80s action movie posters clung to the walls. Some had the corners peeling up. A desk sat in one corner with small military figurines lined up in a neat formation. Laundry remained on the floor, and even the bed was messy. Had Conrad left the room untouched in the hopes it would one day be in use again? It was certainly a typical trait of a parent who'd lost a child. Still, the bedclothes looked fresh, not marred by years of sun damage and age. Whoever had slept in the bed had done so recently. She closed the door again and stepped across the hall into the bathroom. As she washed her hands minutes later, she couldn't shake the feeling that was beginning to settle over her. The feeling that maybe Conrad knew more than he was letting on about his son's disappearance. She returned to the front of the house. "Goodbye, Mr. Baptiste," she called, receiving no answer. By the time she rejoined Sam in the car, Reverend Holly's truck was gone. "Everything okay?" Sam asked as she put the car in reverse and backed out of the driveway. Margot considered keeping what she'd seen from Sam, but knew it wouldn't do any good. If Sam found out another way later on, it would only fill their relationship with distrust. "I noticed something when I was going to the bathroom." "That he leaves the seat up?" Sam offered with a smirk. "The room he kept for Thomas. I'm pretty sure someone is sleeping in there now. There were clothes on the floor, and the bed was unmade. At first, I guessed that he kept the room just like his son had left it. But the bedsheets looked new, and the clothes don't look like what a teenage boy would have worn 20 years ago." "What are you saying?" Sam pressed. "I don't know. I'm just telling you what I saw. I don't think Conrad is living alone. Maybe Thomas came home, and he just never told anyone." She brightened at the idea. "Maybe." From the center console, Sam's phone beeped with an incoming call. She scooped it up and pressed it to her ear. "Officer Raymond." The crackle of another voice came through over the line, but it was too muffled for Margot to pick out individual words. The fact that Sam's expression went from neutral to unhappy told her that it wasn't good news. "I understand," Sam said. "Thank you." As soon as Sam ended the call, Margot asked, "What's happened?" "They managed to identify the more recent body. It belonged to another missing persons case, Henry Dalton. He went missing from Port Marie 10 years ago." 6. Margot knew the Dalton family. They had been members of the church for as long as she'd been there, and were at service every week, sitting in the same pew. How had she missed that they, too, had a child go missing? She wanted to offer them support when Sam broke the news. "Look, I know you want to be there, but we need to do this by the book as much as possible," Sam said, as if reading Margot's mind. "How did I not know he'd gone missing?" "It happened after you had already left for seminary. I remember it pretty well, though. He was in his front yard one afternoon, and then he just vanished. People searched for days, but never found anything. The police didn't have any leads either, just like with Thomas." Margot hoped Sam would at least let her provide pastoral counseling to her congregants. "Can you tell them that I'm here if they need to talk?" "I'll pass it on." "You can drop me back at home," Margot said, intent on learning all she could about Henry's abduction. 10 minutes later, Margot sat with her laptop on her knees, digging through the newspaper archives to find anything on Henry's disappearance. She found that there was only one article that had been uploaded. Just like Thomas. This one was dated March 17th, exactly like the one from Thomas's disappearance 10 years earlier. "Another local boy vanishes, leaving Port Marie rocked," by Veronica Morris Sawyer, staff writer. 10 years to the day, another member of the Port Marie community has vanished without a trace. 11-year-old Henry Dalton was last seen playing in his front yard by his parents and neighbors. He was discovered missing when his mother went to call him in for dinner. Search parties, including many volunteers from the local church, have been dispatched, but so far they have not located Henry. People are quick to point out the similarity to Thomas Baptiste's disappearance. For those who may not remember, Thomas Baptiste disappeared after boarding a bus headed out of town. His case remains open and unsolved. Police are asking anyone with any information to reach out to the tip line that has been set up. As we come together to support the Daltons, speculation abounds. Are the two cases connected? And if they are, what possible motive exists to link these boys? The fact that Veronica was the same writer who covered the first story struck Margot as more than mere coincidence. What connection did she have to the missing boys? Was it simply a case of luck of the draw that set Veronica on the path to reporting on the disappearances? Or was there something more hidden within her words? Like with Thomas's article, this one came with a school photo of the missing boy. The original had likely been printed in black and white, but when the records were digitized, the photo had been updated. Margot studied Henry's face for a long time. She tried to place him in her mind, but any connection she may have had remained just out of reach. An incoming call disrupted her focus, and she set aside the computer. "Hello, this is Margot," she answered. "Reverend Quade, this is Roy Dalton," a high-tenor voice said on the other end of the line. "Officer Raymond said she would be speaking with you," Margot replied. "She said we could come to you if we needed support." "Of course." She closed her laptop. "I can come over right now." "Thank you." Margot could hear how close Mr. Dalton was to breaking down, and her heart ached for his loss. "I'll see you soon." She arrived at the Dalton home and paused in the driveway. It had been a decade, but she could still see young Henry playing in the yard. How had no one seen who took him? Did he know his abductor? Had he gone willingly? Margot shook the images and litany of questions from her mind, focusing her attention on being the steady rock this family needed her to be. Margot knocked on the front door and waited. She could hear footsteps from within the house and was soon met by Roy Dalton. He had bags under his eyes and his cheeks were pale. His wife Christina appeared at his side, and Margot noted she'd been crying. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Roy said. "I am so sorry for your loss," Margot said. "Please come in. Don't mind the mess," Christina mumbled. Margot followed them into the house and let the grieving couple lead her to the den. The heat from baseboard heaters filled the room with stuffy hot air, but she wouldn't complain. She took a seat on the couch and waited for them to join her. "Would you like something to drink? Tea or coffee?" Christina was clinging to the formality of having a house guest. "Tea would be great, thank you." Christina nodded, mostly to herself, and disappeared toward the kitchen. Roy sat across from Margot and wrung his hands. "We'd always hoped that Henry just took off and he'd come home one day. I'm so sorry that this was the news the police had to bring you. They said that he probably died not long after he disappeared." Tears slid down Roy's cheeks, unbidden. "I'm here for whatever you need. I'd be happy to hold a memorial for Henry, to honor his life." "Thank you. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to bury our son. Officer Raymond said they can't release his remains until they figure out who killed him." "That's understandable. I'm sure the police are doing everything they can to find out what happened to Henry," Margot said. Christina returned with a mug of tea. Her hands shook as she passed it over. Through a sob, she said, "They said they found him at the church." Margot took a sip of tea to formulate her response. If the police had divulged the whereabouts of Henry's body, then it couldn't hurt to admit she knew that. "I know. I was there when he was discovered." That piece of information had the opposite effect she'd hoped. Christina collapsed against her husband, sobbing more vigorously. Her whole body shook as Roy wrapped his arms around his wife. "How could he have been there this whole time and no one noticed?" "I wish I had more answers for you," Margot replied. "Why would God take our boy from us like this and leave us wondering for so long?" Christina sniffled, trying to regain her composure. Margot was at a loss. The God she believed in was benevolent and looked after his children. He wouldn't have allowed a child to suffer how it appeared Henry had. But she knew that telling these people God didn't have a hand in their son's death wasn't the right answer. It is going to take time to make sense out of all of this. She stood, needing to expend some nervous energy. She moved to the mantel which housed photos of Henry, much like Conrad Baptiste's mantel had displayed photos of Thomas. As she picked up a smiling picture of a happy child, she realized the connection her mind had tried to make. Henry bore a striking resemblance to Thomas Baptiste. Perhaps whoever took Thomas had seen those similarities too. What if there were others? She knew what she needed to do. She had a date with the newspaper archives yet again. 7. Thomas and Henry's abductions seemed less coincidental the more Margot considered the facts. Both had gone missing at the same time of year and were roughly the same age. Whoever took them had a type, and as much as she wished they were the only ones, someone capable of such violence wasn't likely to stop unless they had been caught. They were quickly approaching the anniversary date, and Margot couldn't shake the feeling that yet another boy was about to go missing, or that there were others who had disappeared after Henry. After a few false starts, she found an article from 5 years ago, again from mid-March, penned by the same staff writer as the others. Third boy taken on anniversary of tragic abductions, by Veronica Morris Sawyer, staff writer. In what is becoming a disturbing pattern, a third boy has gone missing from his Port Murray home. 15-year-old Dustin Grady disappeared on his way home from school on the anniversary of the disappearances of Henry Dalton and Thomas Baptiste. The 2 other missing boys would now be in their late teens and early 20s. Their cases remain unsolved. Could this be the work of the same predator? According to police records, Dustin was a troubled boy and had brushes with the law on several occasions for minor vandalism and loitering. Police are examining all angles, including the possibility that Dustin simply ran away. His family was not on hand to comment on a possible motive for Dustin to leave town. It could just be a coincidence, but as always, anyone with information should contact the police tip line. Margot looked at Dustin's photo accompanying the article. He bore an undeniable resemblance to Thomas and Henry. She searched the archives for news of missing children before Thomas's disappearance, but found none. So, this had started with Thomas. If the police positively identified the second set of remains as Thomas, then who was occupying the bedroom in Conrad's home? For a fleeting moment, the possibility that Dustin had somehow survived his abduction crossed her mind. Why would he be different, though? He'd had brushes with the law where the other boys had clean records, but that couldn't be enough of a difference to convince a killer to spare his life. If he had met the same fate as the other boys, where were his remains? She knew Sam wouldn't divulge such details to her, but she needed to share her theory. Margot dialed Sam's cell phone and waited. "This isn't a good time. I've got the press hounding me about why the church is closed," Sam answered in one long breath. "I know you're busy. I just needed to tell you something about the case." "I'm listening." "After you identified Henry's remains, I went back and looked through the newspaper archives. There was another boy who went missing 5 years ago." "Dustin Grady," Sam interrupted in a hushed tone. "Right. He and Henry both bear a resemblance to Thomas. I don't want to speak for whoever did this, but it seems they have a type." "I'll have the techs go back to the church and see if there's a third body." "I know you shouldn't be telling me, but did they identify the other set of remains?" Margot questioned tentatively. She held her breath as she waited for Sam's response. "They're taking longer. Look, I appreciate you letting me know about the other missing boy and the resemblance. It helps." "Just do whatever you can to bring these boys justice," Margot said. "I need to go. This reporter isn't going to leave me alone unless I give her a comment." "Let me guess. Veronica Morris Sawyer," Margot said with a chuckle. "She a friend of yours?" "She's the one who wrote about all 3 of the missing boys." Margot wouldn't say she'd made a career out of reporting on these disappearances, but her name hadn't shown up on many other articles in the paper's archives. All of her articles lacked real emotion for the situation. They gave little information about the circumstances surrounding the abductions, or the grief and fear felt by those left behind. Margot's stomach did an uncomfortable flop as she realized what was bothering her. "Sam, what if she's involved?" The words came out before she could stop them. "What makes you think that?" "The way the articles were written, they lacked empathy. Maybe it's nothing, but her name doesn't appear on many other articles." "I'll keep that in mind," Sam said. "Thanks for the heads up." "Be safe." Margot ended the call, but her uneasiness remained. She would let Sam follow up on Veronica, of course. At the same time, she couldn't shake her curiosity about who was sharing Conrad's home, living in Thomas's bedroom. Just maybe a visit unaccompanied by the police would make the older man more willing to speak openly. Margot paid closer attention to the geography as she made the short trip to Conrad's house. He lived just 2 streets over from the Daltons. She didn't know the Grady's address offhand, but she guessed they weren't far either. She began building a narrative in her mind, one that didn't sit well with her at all. Conrad was in close proximity to all 3 missing boys. But what motive would he have to hurt them, including his own child? She arrived at the Baptiste property to find an empty driveway. Given her initial impression of Conrad's frailty, she didn't believe he'd gone out. Still, she trudged up to the front door and knocked and waited. Nothing happened. Margot tried knocking louder. "Mr. Baptiste, it's Reverend Margot Quade from the church. Please, can we talk?" Still nothing. She turned to leave and spotted a patrol car pulled up to the edge of the driveway, blocking her exit. Margot approached the car as the driver rolled down the window. "What are you doing here, Margot?" Sam asked. "I thought maybe Conrad would be more willing to talk about what happened to his son if it was just me rather than a group," she admitted. She brushed a few strands of hair from her face. "How'd it go with Veronica?" "I gave her a vague quote and she went away." "Are you looking into what I mentioned?" "I will, but there's more pressing news. The techs identified the other set of remains. They belonged to Thomas, like I suspected. I was just coming to break the news to Conrad. I called his ex-wife and let her know. She's driving down in the morning." "It doesn't look like he's home," Margot noted, gesturing to the empty driveway. Before Sam could comment, a voice crackled over the dispatch radio. It was loud enough that Margot could hear it from where she stood. "All units be advised, we have a report of a missing child." That isn't just a coincidence. Margot was sure of it now that she'd uncovered the pattern. She waited while Sam jotted down the details. Martin Fairbanks. She knew Martin. He was in the youth choir and a member of the interfaith youth group. He was a kind boy with a big heart. Her heart hammered against her ribs as fingers of icy dread slid down her spine. He also bore a resemblance to the other missing boys. I should have seen this coming. "I know the family," Margot said. Sam gave her a stern look. "I told you that you can't be a part of this investigation officially." "I'm not. I am a family friend and their pastor. You sent me to the Daltons as their pastor. How is this any different?" "They're going to be distraught," Margot replied, her voice strained. If the fear that gripped her was any indication, his parents must be terrified. "Fine, but you need to hang back if I tell you." "Of course," Margot answered, and retreated to her own car. She said a silent prayer that they would be able to rescue Martin. 8. Margot pulled in behind Sam's patrol car 3 streets over from Conrad's home. She hung back until Sam was out of her car and marching up the short front walk. Margot fell into step behind her cousin and waited as Sam rang the bell. The door opened immediately, and Cynthia Fairbanks stood on the other side of the threshold, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Thank God you're here," she said when she saw Sam. "Mrs. Fairbanks, may we come in?" Sam said. "Please." Cynthia led them into a living room that was well lived in. A board game which looked to be mid-play sat on the table. Margot knew that Cynthia's husband, Bernard, worked odd hours. "Is your husband home, Mrs. Fairbanks?" Sam asked. "No, he's at work. I called him as soon as I realized Marty was missing." "Okay," Sam said. "Let's sit down, and you can tell me what happened." Margot settled next to her cousin and listened as Cynthia explained the circumstances leading to her son's disappearance. "He stayed home from school today because he wasn't feeling well." She pointed to the board game. "I think he just wanted to spend some time with me. He's not old enough to stay home by himself. He's only 13. He thinks he's old enough, but—" She trailed off, tears staining her cheeks. "Can you tell me when you noticed something was wrong?" Sam pressed gently. "It was an hour ago, maybe. I'd told him to go lie down for a bit. I went to check on him, and he was gone." Sam asked in a compassionate voice, "Has he ever mentioned wanting to run away? Or maybe he went and saw a friend?" "No. Marty is a good boy. He wouldn't run away. And all of his friends are in school. Who would he be going to see?" "Have you noticed anyone out of place hanging around the house lately?" Margot interjected, earning a glare from Sam. "Out of place? I don't think so. Like who?" Margot shrugged in an effort to hide her line of questioning. "Anyone you didn't recognize?" "No, I don't think so." "Can I see his room?" Sam asked, getting to her feet. "Of course. It's this way." Cynthia shuffled into the hall and led them to the last room on the left. It looked like a typical teenage boy's room with action movie posters. The drapes and bedspread were a matching combination of deep greens and blues. They reminded Margot of the ocean. The bed wasn't made, but it also didn't look to Margot's untrained eye like he'd been taken against his will. "Were his shoes missing?" she asked. "I'm sorry?" Cynthia rasped. Sam seemed to pick up on Margot's line of thought. "It doesn't look like he was taken from his room. It's possible he left of his own accord, or at least with someone he knew. Did you notice if his shoes were missing too?" "I didn't check." They returned to the front of the house. Sure enough, his shoes and coat were missing. It appeared that Martin had gone willingly. "Does Martin have a cell phone?" Sam was reaching for her own as she spoke. "What teenager doesn't? He practically lives on that thing. I didn't see it in his room earlier." "We'll need you to come down to the precinct to give a statement. We're also going to need his cell phone number so we can try and track him." "Anything you need. Please, just find my son." Sam gave her a sympathetic look and headed out, leaving Margot and Cynthia to stand in the front hall. Cynthia wrapped her arms around her torso, warding off some unseen chill. "I heard that the church is closed due to structural issues. We're working to get it resolved as soon as possible. Reverend Holly and I are coming up with alternative meeting places in the meantime." "I heard that they found bodies in the basement." Cynthia's voice was a whisper. Margot stiffened. There were only a few people who knew that piece of information. "Where do you hear that?" "I do yoga with Belinda Sanchez. She said her brother Pedro was mumbling something about it. Is it true? Did they find bodies? Oh my God, is my Marty one of them?" "I can't say. You'd have to ask the police. I want you to know that I will be here for you and your husband. Anything you need. I'd be happy to help." "Please, just promise me they're going to find my Marty alive." Margot couldn't make that promise. Given the pattern that had been established with the other missing boys, the police had a small window of time in which to find him. "The police are going to do everything they can." Cynthia nodded mutely. Her eyes were beginning to glaze over. Margot gave her a firm squeeze on the arm. "Come on, I'll take you to the precinct." The trip across town was silent and short. Cynthia stared blankly out the passenger window. Margot wasn't in a talkative mood either. She was beginning to wonder if Conrad could have been behind it all. It was a horrible thing to think of a man who had given so much of his life and time to the church. It didn't make sense that he'd want to harm his son or anyone else. But he was conspicuously absent right when Martin went missing. And there was another suspect. Where was Veronica Morris Sawyer at the time of Martin's disappearance? "You know, I read those articles in the paper all those years ago when those other boys went missing. They never found them, Cynthia said in a monotone voice, as Margot escorted her to the bullpen and Sam's desk. Margot pulled another chair over and sat beside Cynthia as Sam took her statement. Some 20 minutes later, Bernard Fairbanks burst into the bullpen, his hair disheveled and wild-eyed. "Cynthia, what happened?" he boomed. Cynthia took one look at her husband and broke down sobbing. Margot wrapped her in a tight embrace and made soft shushing noises, letting Sam deal with the frantic husband. "Mr. Fairbanks, your son has been reported missing. Your wife contacted us as soon as she realized what had happened. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to talk to you," Sam said, physically intercepting him before he could reach his wife. "Missing? How?" Sam didn't respond. She just ushered him out of the bullpen and into a private room. Cynthia's sobs subsided, and Margot lightened her embrace. "He's going to blame me," she whimpered. "No, he's not. He's just as scared as you are. When you're finished, why don't you come over and I can make you something to eat?" "That's so kind of you. Thank you." It was the least Margot could do. Besides, Bernard would be busy for a while with the police. Margot escorted Cynthia back to the car and they rode in silence to Margot's apartment. "It isn't much," Margot said as they walked in. She'd left it a bit more of a mess than usual, with her computer open on the couch. It still had the news articles open, and she quickly closed it. "Why don't you have a seat?" Margot said. "I'll make us some sandwiches." It wasn't going to be anything fancy, but she wanted to give Cynthia sustenance. Margot filled her tea kettle just in case as she set about fixing the food. If she knew anything about the people in her town, they were tea drinkers. "You know about the other boys who went missing, don't you?" Cynthia said from the couch. "I've read about them, yes." "They were never found. What if that happens with my Marty?" "You have to stay positive, Cynthia. You have to have faith that the police will find him before anything bad happens to him." "You just never think it's going to happen to you. Bad things are what happen to other people. I know it sounds horrible and even unchristian, but it's like God is punishing us for something, and we don't know what we've done." "The God I believe in is kind and doesn't hurt his people. I believe you'll see your son again, and I believe he's going to be okay." "You were there when they found those bodies, weren't you?" Cynthia asked. "You know what's really going on." Margot left the kitchen to join Cynthia in the living room area. "I was, but I can't talk about it. It's an active police investigation." Cynthia wrung her hands together. "I feel so hopeless, like I have no control over anything." "I understand." Margot squeezed Cynthia's shoulder, wishing it was that easy to offer someone strength. "I can't imagine how scared you are right now, but you're not alone. You have this entire community behind you." Cynthia nodded dully. Margot hesitated. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" "Okay." "Do you know Veronica Morris Sawyer? She's a reporter." "Port Marie is small, but that name doesn't ring a bell." Cynthia's brow furrowed and her lips pursed. "Wait, no, I think I've seen the name before. She's the one who wrote the articles about the missing boys. Do you think she'll want to talk to us?" "It's possible." Margot admitted to herself that she had little idea what could motivate Veronica to take the boys, let alone harm them. If she'd wanted notoriety for her career, she hadn't succeeded. That left only one other possibility. Did Martin know Conrad Baptiste? "The old custodian from the church?" Margot nodded and waited for Cynthia's response. "I don't think so. At least not personally. They probably crossed paths at the church when Marty was little, but Conrad hasn't worked there in years." "Why are you asking about him?" "No reason," Margot said, trying to cover her digging. "No, there is a reason. Cynthia's voice was stronger, and her eyes flashed with anger. "Wait, is he involved?" I really didn't mean anything by the question. But the damage was already done, the suspicion sown. Margot retreated to the kitchen in time to catch her phone skittering across the counter since it was on vibrate. Sam's cell phone number flashed across the screen. "Hey, has Bernard calmed down?" Margot asked in a hush. "Yeah. Look, where did you take Cynthia?" "Back to my place. I figured she could use something to eat and some company away from the house." "We tracked Martin's phone," Sam said. "A uniform found it on the side of the road, like someone tossed it out of a moving car." Margot headed toward the front of the apartment, the safest distance from Cynthia, and said, "Sam, I have a bad feeling about this. What if it's Conrad? I thought you were on the Veronica bandwagon. The more I think about it, I can't come up with a motive for her that makes sense." "What makes you think it's Conrad?" Sam asked. "The officers who investigated Thomas's disappearance cleared him all those years ago." "Come on, Sam. Didn't his answers seem a little rehearsed to you this morning? Besides, all of the boys bore a resemblance to Thomas. They all went missing within a mile of Conrad's home, and seemed to happen around the same time of year, too." Sam let out a long breath. "You're not wrong. It fits. But why would he stop for such long periods of time? I don't know. Maybe these dates mean something specific to him. Did Thomas's remains have stab marks, too?" It was a gamble whether Sam would give her a straight answer. "Yes," Sam said quietly. "It looked like it." He wouldn't be the first man to develop some sort of ritual in killing. "Did they find a third body?" "No, just those two." That didn't make any sense. Unless Dustin escaped before Conrad could kill him. If he broke free, where has he been for the last 5 years? "Sam, you should go back to Conrad's house. Martin could be there, or the church." "I'll send teams to both right now." Margot ended the call. Sam may be sending reinforcements, but Margot had no idea if they'd arrive in time. Besides, she was closer. She parceled up the sandwiches and tea before stepping back into Cynthia's line of sight. "Cynthia, I think I should take you home, just in case Martin comes back on his own. You don't want him to come home to an empty house." "You're right," Cynthia said, her voice hoarse. Her shoulders sagged as Margot ushered her back to the car. Time to save a boy's life. 9. The sun set behind the houses and tree line of Port Marie as Margot returned to the church, her muscles tensing. She knew that Sam was only a phone call away if she really needed her. Margot wasn't defenseless, though. She may have been a chaplain in the army, but she'd been through basic training and had the same combat skills as her fellow soldiers. She hoped those skills wouldn't be necessary. The church sat dark against the fading daylight. She pulled into the back parking lot and spotted the rickety pickup truck she'd first seen in Conrad's driveway that morning. Margot held her breath as she approached the back door to the church. It sat propped open with a rock. The rear of the church housed the kitchen, the fellowship hall, and the children's chapel. None of those connected to the basement. The only basement access consisted of the entrance she and Pedro had used the day before, when this whole ordeal began. With cautious steps, Margot made her way to the sanctuary, noting 2 sets of muddy footprints on the carpet leading to the narthex. One set of prints was distinctly child-sized. She reached for the phone in her pocket to alert Sam, only to find it wasn't there. She closed her eyes and bit her lip, realizing she'd left it in the front seat of her car. There was no time to go back and get it, though. Martin's life was in danger. Margot hoped the carpeting would muffle her approach, and she did her best to keep silent on the hardwood floor of the narthex. Light filtered up the stairs from the basement. Forensic equipment sat discarded in front of her, so the light had to be from the camping lantern and single bulb fixture down below. She silently berated herself again for leaving the phone in her car. She knew she should call Sam for backup, but she needed to save Martin if she could. Halfway down the stairs, Margot picked up on hushed voices coming from below her, still too far to pick out distinct speakers. She took another step toward them, but her foot landed on one of the creaky steps. The conversation ceased immediately. Margot took an exaggerated step down the last 2 stairs and pressed herself to the wall, out of sight of the doorway. Like the back door, this one sat partially open too. It gave her a semi-obstructed view into the room. She waited, hoping the voices would resume. They did. "I still don't get why we're down here," Martin Fairbanks said, his voice crackling with puberty. "I told you. It's a game," replied a voice that did not belong to Conrad Baptiste. The speaker sounded much younger, in fact. Not much older than Martin himself. Dustin, maybe? Without considering the consequences, Margot stepped into the doorway. She found Martin on his knees in the middle of the room, his hands bound together in front of him. She couldn't see his ankles, but she assumed they were bound too. The other occupant looked similar enough to Martin and the others that it had to be Dustin Grady. He'd aged a lot in the 5 years he'd been missing. "Who are you?" Dustin snapped, the knife in his hand glinting in the yellow light. She was able to make out flecks of blood on it. Some of it was old and rust-colored. Some looked far fresher. "I'm Margot. I'm a friend. Can you tell me what's going on here?" she asked, looking directly at Martin. "I don't know. This is kind of freaking me out," Martin answered. "Don't talk to her." Dustin turned and brandished the knife at her. "You're ruining it. You need to leave." "Dustin. That's your name, right? Dustin Grady?" Margot took a step into the room, keeping her hands where he could see them. She slowly began working her way forward in the hopes of placing herself in his path, in front of Martin. "I said you need to leave!" Spittle flecked from Dustin's mouth as he shouted. "You know that I can't do that. A lot of people have been worried about you. Your parents, your friends." She took another step so that she was now in line with Martin. Dustin's eyes widened and his cheeks flushed. "This isn't how it's supposed to happen." "Tell me how it is supposed to happen, Dustin," Margot urged, shuffling another step to the left. "It has to be him." He gestured to the boy still sitting bound on the floor. "I have to do it. I promised I would." "Who did you promise?" "I told him I'd do it, and he let me live." "Conrad Baptiste?" She now stood directly in his line of attack. If he wanted his young victim, Dustin would have to go through her first. Dustin let out a gargled laugh. "He told me he had to do it because God wanted him to. Can you believe that? He said he was tested and he passed the test. But then God said he had to do it again and again." "With Thomas and Henry and you?" she prompted. She swore she heard sirens in the distance. Dustin didn't appear to hear them, though. Dustin began pacing back and forth, the handle of the knife pressed against his temple. She just needed a little more time to disarm him. "Did he tell you why he chose you and the others? And why they happened when they did?" Margot asked. "It's when God told him he had to be tested again. It was important he passed the test every time. He said a man has to know the different parts of life." His words didn't make any sense. "What test? Help me understand, Dustin." "He told me the story of when God told Abraham to sacrifice his son. He said he had to do that too." Margot let out a sigh. "Did he tell you how that story ended? Isaac was spared." "That was me. I was the one he saved," Dustin said, jabbing a finger toward his chest. He said I was special. He showed me how to pass the test. He said I have to do it now. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Dustin. I truly am. But you don't have to do what he says. You can be free from him. Let me help you. Free? Dustin took a step forward and brandished the knife again. She nodded. Yes, you can come home to your family. She began taking small steps forward, still keeping her hands where he could see them. As long as he didn't perceive her as a physical threat, she could take him down. But he took care of me. Dustin, he kidnapped you, and he tried to kill you. You don't understand anything, Dustin wailed, lunging forward. For a brief moment, Margot stood rooted to the spot, surprised by his sudden move. Then her training kicked in. She reached forward and grabbed his wrist, twisting his arm behind his back. He struggled against her, the knife stabbing at empty air. The more he moved, the closer they staggered towards Martin. You don't have to do this, Margot grunted. Conrad is sick. He needs help too. But we can't help him unless you put the knife down. Dustin struggled, kicking wildly, but she managed to wrangle him to the ground. She squeezed his hand until he finally dropped the knife. It skittered across the cold basement floor. He let out another laugh, and this time he just kept laughing. Tears sprang to his eyes as Margot held on to him. You can't help him, Dustin rasped. Out of the corner of her eye, Margot spotted Martin scooting along the floor toward the discarded blade. Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and Sam appeared, her weapon drawn. Margot held Dustin in a tight embrace, his arms pinned at his side. We're okay, Margot called over her shoulder, hoping Sam would lower her gun. He wants to kill me, Martin said in a hoarse tone, the knife clutched in both hands. He's not going to hurt you. Just put that down, Marty, Sam said, her tone soft. Until now, Martin had kept a brave face. At the sound of Sam's soft voice, tears dampened Martin's cheeks, and the knife slid from his fingers. Sam pulled him close and retrieved a utility knife from her gear, sliding the blade through the rope at his wrists and ankles. Next time, answer your phone, Sam said to Margot, as another uniformed officer appeared and ushered Martin upstairs. Conrad? Margot asked, breathless. Dustin had gone limp in her grasp. Dead, Sam said, probably since we saw him this morning. Stabbed in the chest. Margot nodded, a mix of relief and sadness coursing through her. How had everyone missed the signs that Conrad wasn't well for all those years? Dustin's words resonated in her mind, about there being certain times in a man's life that were important. Thomas had been not quite 15 when he died, and that would mean that he would have been nearly 25 when Henry was taken, and almost 30 when Dustin had vanished. Not the milestones she'd anticipated, but she didn't doubt they held some important significance to Conrad. It was a shame they couldn't ask him. Sam dragged Dustin to his feet and out of Margot's embrace. Dustin Grady, you are under arrest for the murder of Conrad Baptiste and the kidnapping and attempted murder of Martin Fairbanks. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? I had to, he mumbled, as if he hadn't heard Sam's words. Sam sighed and handcuffed him, then ushered him upstairs to a waiting patrol car. Margot followed, feeling heavy and slow. The adrenaline that had fueled her confrontation with Dustin ebbed, leaving her exhausted. The evening air was cool on her face, rousing her a little as red and blue lights flashed and then disappeared toward the center of town. An ambulance was parked at the bottom of the driveway, and 2 paramedics tended to Martin. Cynthia and Bernard will be relieved to know he's safe, Margot said, standing beside Sam. They will. Sam rounded on her. How could you be so reckless and stupid? You could have been hurt, or worse. I was going to call you, but I left my phone in the car. If I'd waited, he could have hurt Martin. And I may be a minister, but I'm not helpless. Remember, I got the same combat training as everyone else." Margot didn't like having to remind her cousin of her training. "Still, you aren't a soldier anymore. It's not your job to put yourself in harm's way," Sam said. "I did what I had to. I disarmed Dustin and de-escalated the situation." "Martin got his hands on that knife. What would you have done if I hadn't shown up?" "I would have talked him down." Sam let out a slow exhale and pinched the bridge of her nose. "Look, I'm grateful you found them and that we got Martin back safe. It's just stressful for me having to worry about you, too." "I can take care of myself, Sam. I promise." She tucked her hands inside her jacket sleeves. "I'm sorry Mr. and Mrs. Grady have to learn their son is alive, only to be charged with murder." Sam nodded. "Did you ever follow up on Veronica?" Margot asked. She knew the reporter wasn't responsible, but she wanted to put her own suspicions to rest. She was friends with Conrad's ex-wife and fought to get the story of Thomas's disappearance. When the other boys went missing, she claimed them as hers too, like it was the least she could do to honor Thomas's legacy. "I'm glad she wasn't involved." "I don't get why Conrad did it in the first place," Sam said, leaning against the hood of her car. "If Dustin's to be believed, it sounds like Conrad was suffering from an undiagnosed mental illness. Dustin's story was that Conrad said God told him he had to kill his son, like the parable of Abraham and Isaac. For some reason, Conrad felt compelled to repeat the cycle with other boys that looked like Thomas. Somehow, Dustin had convinced him to let him live, only to be caught in the same cycle. "This sort of thing shouldn't happen in Port Marie," Sam said. "We're a nice little town with no drama." Margot smirked. "Every town has its fair share of drama. We should have known this mystery was bound to surface again." It had taken 20 years, but her prayer had been finally answered. "I guess I can't argue with that. Given that this case is wrapped up, can we have our worship space back now?" Margot asked. Sam gave her a tired grin. "I'll make sure the crime scene gets released in the morning." The ambulance pulled away, leaving Margot and Sam alone in front of the church. The night grew quiet, and Margot studied the building. Its decades of old secrets had finally been unearthed. "We'll get through this as a community," Margot said, realizing she'd found the topic for her next sermon. 10. By morning, Port Marie was abuzz with news of Margot's involvement in Martin's rescue. The front page of the newspaper bore a much lengthier article by Veronica Morris Sawyer. Port Marie Mystery Laid to Rest, by Veronica Morris Sawyer, staff writer. 20 years have gone by since Thomas Baptiste went missing, and we now have the answers Port Marie has been seeking for 2 decades. In total, 4 boys, including Thomas Baptiste, Henry Dalton, Dustin Grady, and Martin Fairbanks, were taken from their homes and around town. According to Officer Samantha Raymond, the culprit in the first 3 disappearances was Thomas's own father, Conrad Baptiste. Officer Raymond said, "It appears Mr. Baptiste suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness that fueled his actions." The remains of Thomas Baptiste and Henry Dalton were found in the basement of the church where Conrad had served as custodian until recently. Sources confirm that Conrad Baptiste was later found dead in his home. In a tragic turn of events, Dustin Grady survived his abduction, only to fall victim to Conrad Baptiste's delusions. He has been arrested and awaits arraignment. His family has a bittersweet reunion ahead of them. Witnesses describe the rescue of Martin Fairbanks by local minister and Army veteran Margot Quade as heroic. Young Martin is quoted as saying, "She stepped in like it wasn't anything and talked him down." Martin's family couldn't be reached for comment at this time. "You made the news," Sam said as she knocked on the door to Margot's office, much like Pedro had done only a few short days ago. Margot set her notes aside and smiled. I saw. I guess Veronica finally got the story she was looking for, the one that brought closure. Sam sat down across from her. Cynthia bawled for a good half hour when we finally let her see Martin. He couldn't stop talking about you. I'm glad they got a happy ending. I am too. Did you ever figure out how Dustin managed to get Martin alone and out of the house? Margot pressed. It turned out they'd been messaging online for a while. I don't think Martin realized what he was getting into. He thought he was just meeting up with a friend, someone his own age. I still can't believe we all missed the signs that Conrad wasn't well, Margot said, rubbing at the tight feeling in her upper chest of regret, sadness. He was such an integral part of this community for so long. Some people are really good at hiding those parts of themselves. What I don't understand is how Dustin ended up falling for his theory. I can't speak for him, but I got the feeling he played on Conrad's sense of remorse. After a time, Stockholm Syndrome took over. In order to survive, he had to believe what Conrad believed, and it became real to him. Tragic. Sam sighed, then asked, Did the Daltons and Maureen Prescott decide what they wanted to do about services? Nodding, Margot said, They agreed to have a small ceremony during today's worship to honor their son's memories. Once the remains have been released, we're going to do a private graveside service for just family. I have a feeling we're going to have a packed house today. It may not have been the outcome they were hoping for, but having a resolution, closure, is still a powerful thing. I got word that it looks like they might not charge Dustin after all, Sam said. The prosecution is recommending he seek mental health treatment in a secure facility upstate. I'm thankful he'll get the help he needs after all that he's been through, Margot said. It's really the best outcome he could hope for. Margot turned back to her sermon notes. I hate to cut this short, but I need to finish getting ready for this morning's service. I look forward to it. I'll see you out there. Sam left Margot to finish gathering her thoughts. After a few minutes, Margot donned her vestments and headed out to the pulpit. They'd set 2 other chairs beside the main lectern, where the local imam and rabbi were seated, waiting for her. As she'd predicted, the pews were crammed with people. She could see that Pedro had brought out the extra folding chairs that now lined the back of the sanctuary. Even with the extra seating, some people stood, all ready to mourn the loss of 2 lives cut short. I haven't seen it this full in a long time, the rabbi whispered as Margot took her seat and the choir began the opening anthem. Unfortunately, tragedy unites people, Margot murmured. Down in front of the pulpit, 2 poster-sized photos of Thomas and Henry were adorned with wreaths. 2 tall taper candles sat between them, their flames burning bright. Maureen Prescott sat in the front row on the right, while the Daltons sat opposite her. They may have agreed to this joint memorial, but there was no denying Maureen's ex-husband was the reason why Henry Dalton was dead. Good morning, everyone, Margot said into the microphone when everyone had taken their seats. She faltered, searching for her next words, the sea of faces staring up at her in expectation washing over her like a wave. She cleared her throat and gripped the edges of the pulpit to steady herself. This morning's service is going to be a little different. As most of you know, we've had several losses to our community. We will be raising up Thomas Baptiste and Henry Dalton as we lay them to rest. We are grateful that so many of you have joined us today to remember them. The other interfaith leaders and I will be sharing brief remarks before we invite anyone in the congregation to share any memories they might have of Thomas and Henry. In the middle of the crowd, Margot spotted Martin seated between his parents. His mother had a firm grasp around his shoulders, but he looked fairly well recovered. She was surprised he felt comfortable returning to the church so soon after his ordeal. Margot reminded herself that children were far more resilient than most adults gave them credit for. Margot stepped back from the pulpit and allowed the rabbi to speak his piece. It gave her time to collect her emotions. She hadn't expected to feel overwhelmed. After all, she'd presided over memorials before, but none with the weight of today's service. She let the lilt of the rabbi's prayer lull her into a sense of calm. The rest of the service flowed beautifully, and before long she stood at the exit of the sanctuary down to the fellowship hall, shaking hands and exchanging hugs with parishioners along with her colleagues. She spotted Maureen Prescott next in the line, and Margot prepared herself. "I'm glad you were able to join us today," she said, taking both of Maureen's hands in her own. "You had lovely things to say about Thomas. Thank you. I wish I'd been able to know him better. And again, I am so very sorry for your loss." Maureen sniffled, and Margot guided her out of line to give her some privacy. "If I'm honest," Maureen said, "I knew in my heart a long time ago that he was dead. I think some part of me even knew Conrad had done it. Back then, I thought maybe I was just being spiteful because of the divorce. It's not my business, but can I ask what led to your separation?" "He became hyper-religious, going on, quoting the Bible." "Any verses in particular?" Margot asked. "I stopped paying attention after a while." Tears trickled down Maureen's cheeks. "I should have known something was wrong then." "You did what you thought was best for your family. None of this is your fault." "I feel horrible that so many lives were ruined because I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Margot pulled the other woman into a tight embrace. "I know you feel guilty right now, but it will pass." Maureen dried her eyes and made her way back into the flow of people heading down to the fellowship hall. Margot was about to rejoin her place in the receiving line when she felt a tug on her sleeve. She turned to see Martin standing in front of her. She smiled at him. "How are you doing?" "Better. Thank you for what you did." He innocently reached forward and wrapped his arms around her waist. Surprised at the contact, Margot froze awkwardly, then hugged him back. "I'm glad I was in the right place at the right time." Cynthia stepped up behind her son. "We're going to be having a talk about internet safety," she said. Martin stepped back from Margot and hung his head in embarrassment. "I know. I can't trust people online, even if they seem like friends." Margot patted his shoulder as they, too, left the sanctuary behind. She stayed put until the last congregant had filtered out, before facing the image of Christ on the cross hanging above the pulpit. She whispered a prayer, thanking the Lord for giving her the strength to have weathered this storm. It had been an unexpected test of her faith, but she was confident she had come through stronger on the other side. Whatever came next, she knew she could face it head on. This has been The Sacrificial Lamb, a Reverend Margot Quade cozy mystery novella, Book 2. Written by S.E. Biglow. Narrated by Stephanie Dillard. Copyright 2019 by Sarah Biglow. Production copyright 2022 by Sarah Biglow.